As you remember, we highlight some very important concepts during the two last sessions. We covered some of the security basics related to the computing in general. Then we covered other basics related to the cloud computing itself. And these security concepts, it will be very helpful in the next few sessions, because it will clarify to you how you can evaluate the cloud service provider services and the offers which the cloud service provider can provide it to you. Then we spoke about the capabilities of the cloud service providers as IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS, and we explained the differences between all of them, where the IaaS, it will be the infrastructure as a service, where you are renting only infrastructure as servers. In the case of PaaS, it will be additional component beside the hardware, which is the development platform for your applications. And finally, the SaaS, where you are renting the services from end to end. It means that you are renting the servers, infrastructure, application development, and finally the application. Then you will be responsible only for the data, your data, because even the application, it will be under the supervision of the cloud service provider. And we explained in the last session about the models or the implementation models of the cloud service providers, and we explained the concept of the private cloud, public cloud, and the community cloud. Where the public cloud, it will be the cloud service provider, which it will be shared by multiple multi-tenancy. The private, it will be dedicated for specific organization and owned by a single organization. Community, it is some sort of the private, but it will be shared with a group of organizations. And finally, the hybrid, which it will mix and match between these three different models of the public, private, and community. Also, day before yesterday, we covered some concepts and risks regarding the cloud service providers and common threads. And we will go through all these threads again in the next modules when we start to speak about the other components in details, when we speak about data security, about application security, about infrastructure security, and operations. Any questions regarding this quick summary for what did we cover last two sessions? Okay, then we can start our session for today. And today we will have a quick look on the security consideration for the different implementation models of the cloud. First implementation model, it's the IaaS, infrastructure as a service. And the security considerations which you have to think very carefully when you want to implement this service or provide this service for your organization, some aspects as the multi-tenancy. And of course, we discussed this in more details the last session, and we mentioned that multi-tenancy, it's considered as a characteristics of a cloud implementation, because the cloud, it's considered as, from its definition, a group of shared resources. This means that these shared resources, it will be accessed by multiple users or multiple customers, and all of them will be able to access these resources concurrently. Then this means that on a single host, you may have hundreds of VMs, and these VMs may be distributed across 10 customers or 20 customers. Then by the end of the day, single host, it will be able to handle multiple customers. And this one of the main consideration in the cloud, because you have to ensure that there is enough isolation and proper security controls for this type of characteristics of the cloud. The other point or consideration, it will be the co-location. The co-location, and the co-location here, you can consider it as the point where all the users are reside or hosted on the same host. Because as we mentioned before, suppose that you have a memory problem. Now we have a host, and this host, it has its own memory. Say, for example, it's whatever any value. Say it's 512 GB. If we have virtualization, then this means that this amount of RAM, it will be split between multiple VMs. Each VM, it may have 4 GB, 8 GB, 16 GB, whatever the agreement with the cloud service provider and the customer. But by the end of the day, although each one he has a dedicated part of this RAM, but again, it is basically single RAM. It is a single RAM and it is split into parts. As analogy, you can consider it as a big room, and you want to split this room into 5 offices or 6 offices. What you have to do? The concept here, you can use partitions. Then, although you have your own partition and it is dedicated for you, but this does not mean that you are totally isolated. Then if there is any attack on the physical room itself, then this means that all the partitions or the customers who are using the storage or RAM or whatever, they will be affected. Okay, the other consideration, the hypervisor security and attacks. Again, this is very important. You have to think about it. You have to make your exercise and due diligence with the cloud service provider when you are discussing the services with him, how we are protecting their hypervisor and the virtualization infrastructure. This is very important because just imagine if there is any hacker or disgruntled employee or whatever type of threat factor he was able to take an access for the hypervisor, then this means that he will be able to access all the other VMs. And there are other sophisticated attacks where the hacker, he will be able to take a control over one VM, and from this VM, he can reach to the hypervisor, and from his control on the hypervisor, he will be able to control other VMs on the same host. Then virtualization, although it provides a lot of features for us, especially by using the shared resources, but by the end of the day, again, it will represent some sort of risks which we have to take in our consideration, because this it will be a crisis for us if there is any hacker who was able to catch or capture this traffic or the management of these devices. The other consideration in the ES is the network security. The network security, it's very important because by the end of the day, all these devices, virtualization, the customers, multi-tenancy, storage, whatever, any components of the cloud service provider, it's running on a network. And we have to take care about the network security. And the last session, we discussed network security in details, and we mentioned that you can, or the cloud service provider, we can use rezoning, we can use encryption, we can use firewalls between different zones, we can use IPS between different zones, then we can control the traffic and the type of the traffic and discover any attacks if it will move from one zone to another. Virtual machine attacks, we covered this in the hypervisor security, and as I mentioned a few minutes ago, the virtual machine, it can represent a point of weakness for the whole virtualization, because any hacker, he can take control on the virtual machine, and from this control, he will be able to access the hypervisor. And if he has full access to hypervisor, then this means that he will be able to attack all the other VMs. Virtual switch attacks. In the traditional data centers, switches are physical, and physical switches, it will be secure. Why it's secure? Because if there is any attack on one switch or whatever, you can disable this switch, and as a part of the operation of the switches, that ports, it cannot communicate with together except if they are using the MAC address. Although in the layer 2 attacks, it can change the switch into something sort as a hub and all this stuff, okay? But in the virtualization or in the cloud service providers, a switch, it is not a physical device. A switch is a physical, it's a logical device. Then you will find that the virtual switch, it is the same as the host, and we have the same characteristics as memory, whatever, and all the features. Then it will take a part of the host memory and the storage and configure it as some sort of a switch. Then beside the attacks, which are well known for physical switches on the layer 2 and layer 3, we have another sort of attacks for the virtual switches, as it's some sort of virtualization. Then in this case, it will represent a weakness for us. Finally, the denial of service, and I think we covered this in more details in last session. Then we will come to the concept of the PaaS, platform as a service. And for those who cannot remember the PaaS, as we mentioned, these are the platform as a service where the cloud service provider, it will provide you with programming language, with software libraries, with runtime libraries, and we will allow you to develop your applications for your users. It's very important if you have a PaaS service that it will be totally isolated from the systems. In other words, yes, it should be totally isolated. Yes, it should be under the cloud service provider administration, and there is no need to have any management or control over the, yes, because this it will help the cloud service provider in the troubleshooting and the maintenance. Because if he will provide you the management, then you have to do your own configuration. Another customer, he will do a different configuration. Third customer, he will do a totally different configuration, and so on. Then by the end of the day, the cloud service provider, he will not be able to manage all these different configurations. And each customer, he may have his own configuration, and this it will be a crisis for the cloud service provider, and he will not be able to support the service level agreements which it's signed with the customers. Then they mentioned that, or it's recommended that, no access for the systems. It should be under the control of the cloud service provider, and the customer, he should have the responsibility only for the platform infrastructure. User permissions, it's one of the very important issues, and I don't consider that it should be only come under the PaaS. It should come under whatever, anything, but it may come under the PaaS here because we want to tell you that the user permission will be very important. You are developing applications, you want to provide permissions or the suitable permissions for your users, beside the privileged permissions as well. Privileged permissions, it's very important. It must be handled with care. You have to provide security safeguards for it, such as 2FA for access control and so on. Beside the appropriate permissions for the users. Then if you have users in the financial department, they will have their own permissions, which it will be totally different from these people in the security department or from sales department or marketing department and so on. Then you have to work very carefully and you have to plan the user permissions carefully, and you have to review this permission regularly to ensure that we have the least privilege and these permissions are not accumulated, which it will be considered as sort of the risks. The third consideration for the PaaS is the user access. And of course, the user access here is very important, and we have to highlight four different concepts, and we discussed this again the last two sessions, the IAAA. And the IAAA, we mentioned it is the identity, authentication, authorization, and accounting. And I think we covered this concept in the last two sessions in more details. Malware, Trojans, backdoors, administrations, these are really nightmares, especially for the security administrators. When you are a programmer and you are doing your program, in some situation you have to put some backdoors because you are afraid if we make the controls for authentication and authorization and there was a bug in the program, the administrator or the programmer himself, he will not be able to access the application or the code of the application, then he will be in a trouble. Then he will create a backdoor for him. This backdoor, he can bypass all the access control and he can reach to the code and he can start doing development tasks or fixing bugs and all this stuff. But just imagine if these backdoors are utilized by the hackers, that this means that he will have a full control on the application and the code, and he can insert whatever any lines which, for example, it will collect data and send it to his server, or make a copy of the all the exchange traffic and send it to himself as well. Also, as a programmer, you have to take care about the malware, the tokens, the TSR, and all these programs which it can change your life into a piece of hell. Then in this case, you have to utilize the malware anti-malware, and this the market, there are a full range of products which it will support the operations, and it can discover all these attacks to be resolved. Finally, we will come to the security considerations of the SaaS, which is software as a service. You are a king as a customer, you don't have any responsibility, full responsibility. It's under the cloud service provider for managing hardware, application, data, and everything. But there are some points which are really, really important, and you have to take it in your consideration as the web application security, because SaaS, by the end of the day, usually you are accessed through the browser, and we know that the browser applications are subject for a lot of attacks, and we will have a look on these types of attacks which are classified and defined by WASP in the application security model. We will discuss this in more details in, I think, module number 4. The data policies. This again important, and it's considered as the user permissions. But here, the data policies, it's related only for the data, where what are the permissions which it will provide to your users for the data. Some of them, they will have read data, some of them have read change, some others they will have full control, and so on. Then you have to build your own permissions and data policies based on the business needs and requirements. Finally, we have the data protection and confidentiality. And of course, as we mentioned, in the SaaS, you don't have anything under your control except the data. You have to protect your data. You have to protect the confidentiality of data, where no one will be able to access your data except if he is authorized to see it. And also no one he will be able to access without proper access controls, and so on. And all this can be provided very simply by using the IAAA for identification, authentication, authorization, and accounting, which we discussed before. Any questions?
Osama, I have one question.
Sure.
Can we move to the previous slide, please? Yeah, thanks. So I just wanted to ask one thing in terms of this IAS, PAS, and SAS. So just want to understand when someone say, I mean, I was dealing today with a client, and the client says that everything is on SaaS. We have a cloud, and everything is on SaaS with AWS, but they don't have. They only have the Active Directory with them. So if at all we want to make it in, I mean, Active Directory also on cloud, so in which category it would fall into? Like for example, AIS, PaaS, or into SaaS?
Okay. First of all, AWS visits Amazon Cloud Service Provider. And
Right.
according to my information, I'm not sure about this, but according to my information, AWS does not provide SaaS. They provide ES. In other words,
Okay.
we are providing the hardware, the infrastructure, the load balancer, so on and so. But do they provide applications as well?
Yeah, that's what they said, that they have the other stuffs, I mean other IT with the SaaS, but only the Active Directory part is been taken care by them.
Okay. In this case, it's a SaaS. By the end of the day, it's a SaaS. But even if you have a SaaS, you may have two or maybe other components which it can reside in your side, as we will discover later. But these are, from my experience, I found only two different types of services which it can reside in your company. Number one, the authentication. I don't want to say authentication because it's authentication. It's access control. It's access control. Why? In some situation, you will find the customers, especially the enterprise organizations, they don't have only one cloud service provider service. They have multiple cloud service providers. For example, they are utilizing CRM as Salesforce. They are utilizing Office 365. They are utilizing maybe a SAP application or ERP application under the cloud infrastructure. And all these applications are hosted by their owners. So then Salesforce, it's hosted by Salesforce. Office 365, it's hosted by Microsoft. Whatever any other application or ERP, it will, for example, SAP, it will be provided or hosted by SAP. And we will not be able to say, no, I want to take all these parts and integrate it under a single cloud service provider, AWS or maybe Google or whatever. Why? Because these are owned and managed by their own manufacturer and developers who are supporting this application and provided as a SaaS. Then what is the challenge here? Okay, I can understand this, no problem. But the challenge, just imagine I am a user. I want to have Office 365. I want to have the ERP or let's say SAP application. I want to have Salesforce. And this means that do you need to have multiple username and passwords for each one of them? Then this it will be very difficult, and this it will not enable the user performance, because this means that you will compromise the security of the organization, because the user, when he will not be able to remember all the passwords and usernames, then finally you will find that he will write it down on a paper. In some situation, you will find that the user, he will get a yellow stick paper and you will write the username and passwords and you will stick it on the screen. Then this means that we are losing our security. Then what is the solution here? The solution that you have a single sign-on, SSO. But how single sign-on it will work? How can I integrate different cloud service providers together? How can I integrate Salesforce with Microsoft, with SAP? What we have to utilize here, what we call it the federation service. What we call it the federation service. What is the federation service? The federation service is the Active Directory. You have your own Active Directory, and this Active Directory, it's reside in your company. And you have a username and password, and not only username and password, you will have all the attributes required for the authentication, authorization, and accounting. When you will say, okay, Osama, he is a member in the security team, he has access to authorize to access these applications, and so on. You have to define all the attributes under the Active Directory, or in other words, X509 structure. And you will have something called a federation service. Federation service, it's a different service. It's from Microsoft. And what's going on here? Now, if I have a subscription with 365 or any other users, I have to enable the federation service between the two sites, between Salesforce and my organization. Then when I type that www.office365.com, then it will ask me for username and password. Office 365 server or authentication server, it will say, yes, this is user, it's from organization X. I have a federation for organization X. In other words, I have to trust the Active Directory of organization X. Then it will take the username and password from you. It will communicate with the Active Directory in your organization, or in other words, it will communicate with the federation service in your organization. The federation service, it will check with the Active Directory. It will say, yes, this user is authorized, or he is not authorized. He can use the service, or he will not use the service, and so on. Then in this case, it will the federation service in your organization, it will return a traffic. It will return a message to Office 365 authentication server and say, yes, this user is authorized and he is authenticated and authorized, then he will be able to access the service. It will be the same concept with whatever any cloud service provider you have. Then suppose that your company, they have Salesforce, we have Office 365, they have SAP, they have other services hosted in AWS. Then you have 4 cloud service providers, but by the end of the day, the user, he will have a single username and password, which is hosted on the Active Directory, and you can use the federation services with all of them. How you classify the service, it depends, because in the case of Office 365, in the case of the Salesforce, this it will be SaaS, but in AWS, it may be IaaS, because we are renting some servers or email or whatever. If we are renting email, for example, and they put the email themselves, then it's IaaS. If they take email service from 365 or Semantic or whatever, then it will be SaaS. Then again, whatever the components it will be reside on in your organization, it will be for security or for functionality. Functionality as Active Directory, security as key management. If you remember last session when we explained the encryption and we said that the encryption, it will have two components, the key management and the algorithm. Algorithm is standard. We don't have anything to do with it. It's a standard algorithm. All of us know it, and it's used by any one all over the world. The only difference here, which it will make your encryption powerful or not, the key length and so on. In some situation, we are saying it's not recommended to put all your eggs in one basket. Don't leave the key management with the cloud service providers, because if there is any disgruntled employee, he will be able to reach to this case and he will be able to decrypt your data. Then what is the point here? The point, you have to host your key management in your organization. But by the end of the day, still it's a SaaS service. Although you have one of the components, which is the key management, and in some situation you may host the key management with a different cloud service provider. But again, still it's a SaaS service. Did I answer the question?
Thanks. Yeah. It was quite detailed, explained, Osama. But I'm so sorry. Just wanted to ask one more question as a part of the sub question.
Sure.
If I want to give it, if I want to give my Active Directory in a cloud, so in which category it would come into? Is it into AS, PaaS, or into SaaS?
So you want to do what?
If I want to give it the Active Directory of my company to a cloud service provider, so in which category it would come into? Would it be into IaaS, PaaS, or into SaaS?
How you will implement it? Forget about the names. Tell me how you want to implement it. Now you are an organization, and you have an Active Directory hosted in your company. You have servers, 3 or 4 servers, and we have the user accounts. You want to move this Active Directory into the cloud service provider. Am I right?
Correct, yes.
Okay, then this means that you have your own application, because you have to move all the user accounts into the cloud service provider. Then what do you need? Just you need a server. If you have a server as ES from your cloud service provider, and you will install the Active Directory over it, then this means that you are done. You did the exercise, right? Then it depends upon your way of implementation. In some situation, we'll say, if Microsoft provide the Active Directory themselves, and you have to define the username and passwords only. Look the difference here. In the first scenario, you had the machine and you will install the Active Directory, you install Windows, you will install the Active Directory, and you will restore all username and passwords into the service. Then in this implementation, it's yes. But if you will go to Microsoft and Microsoft will tell you, wait, I have my servers, it has, for example, Windows 2016, and Active Directory is there. All what you have to do to import your data. In this case, it will be SaaS.
Okay. Got it. Understood. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks again.
Understood. Okay. Then we identify the trusted cloud services. This is a very important topic. Why? Because just I want you to understand something. Suppose that, gentlemen, you want to host your application with a cloud service provider. Usually, big organizations, if they will have managed services, they will mention in the service level agreement with the vendor that they have the permission or the right to audit their network. Then, to make sure that they are compliance with the security requirements. If we try to implement the same concept with the cloud service providers, it will be very difficult because the cloud service provider, they will never allow you to audit their networks. They will tell you, we are really sorry, we will not accept this, because this means that if you audit our infrastructure, you will be able to draw a blueprint for all our services. And you will be able to understand the points of weakness in our network, then you will be able to exploit it or hack it or whatever. Also, we have data for other customers. Then there is a chance that you may have a look on this data during your auditing. Then just don't think that you will be able to audit any cloud service providers. Then what is the solution? The solution that you want to make sure that the cloud service provider is providing the best security controls, safeguards, and we are compliant with all the security standards. Then what we can do? What we have to do here that we have to depend upon the international certifications. This means that the cloud service provider, we have to hire third-party company. Of course, a third party. It's not to do the exercise themselves. Third-party company, and they have to let them to audit their network and to give them the report that they are compliant with the security standards. These security standards are the ISO 27001 for ISMS or for the NIST, the special publication 800-53 for the cybersecurity, or BCIDSS. BCIDSS is for the organizations who are working online, purchasing or selling products or services, and we are using the credit card. Then if there are some controls for the PCI DSS, these controls, if you want to use the credit card, then it will provide protection for the credit card data and information for their customers. Also, we have the SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, common criteria, FIPS 140-2. Unfortunately, the time it's very limited and we will not be able to go through all these standards, but they are very important standards and you have to take it in your consideration if you want to compare between cloud service providers, especially the ISO 27001, NIST SB 800-53. Also for the SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, these are type of reports which it will show you the level of the security controls within the cloud service providers. These reports should be provided by the cloud service provider for the what we can say, the customer himself and so on. When these are the standards which you can utilize them instead of doing the audit yourself, because the audit, it will not be easy, especially the cloud service provider hosting multi-tenancy and other customers. Okay, we finalized module number 1. Any questions?
Regarding these standards, how do we know which standards is necessary for which service? Can you please
Sorry,
shed some light?
can you raise your voice, please?
Yeah, I'm saying that how can we recognize which standard is necessary for which service?
How we can do what?
Which standard is necessary for the service like AS, PaaS, and SaaS?
By the end of the day, all of them, it will be the same for the security standards. For security standards, I don't care. Is it SaaS, PaaS, yes, whatever. Because by the end of the day, these standards, it will protect data and infrastructure. It will protect data and infrastructure. Then whatever, any type of implementation, you will have you must have the ISO 27001 for the security controls and compliance with the ISMS best practices, or BCI DSS if you have online marketing activities. Again, this it will be very important. NEST, by the way, NEST and ISO, they are almost I don't want to say the same, but the same concept, because the ISO 27001, it's for ISMS information security information services, sorry, information services, security service management, information security service management. And this is an international standard. While the NEST, it is the same concept, but the NEST, it's developed by US Federation and it's implemented in USA only. But it's popular because it's free. And you can download the NEST and you can implement it without any obligations. But in the ISO 27001, you have to buy the standard documentation, and it's almost cost, I'm not sure, but maybe $150. Okay?
Okay, understood. Thank you.
You are most welcome.